Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now, let's step into the mystery. In the misty cliffs of St. Agnes Bay, a glamorous widow from Barcelona plunges to her death from her villa's treacherous balcony. Was it suicide or a cold-blooded shove? Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unraveling a web of deceit among shady heirs, forged letters from a scandalous past, and hidden jewels that scream motive. Watch as her nephew charms his way to fortune, a timid companion cracks under secrets, a sly art dealer dodges fraud accusations, and a loyal maid flees into the night. Twists of blackmail, tampered railings, and stormy confrontations build to a shocking confession. The quietest soul harbours the deadliest grudge. From Barcelona's echoes to the balcony's fatal whisper, this Miss Marple Mystery grips you with human frailties, clever clues, and a killer reveal that'll leave you breathless. Dive into the shadows. Justice awaits, but who falls next? Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Cliff. The wind howled like a banshee across the jagged cliffs of St. Agnes Bay, a sleepy Cornish village where the sea gnawed relentlessly at the land, carving secrets into the rock. Perched precariously on the edge of this dramatic precipice stood Villa Marisol, a sprawling edifice of weathered stone and wrought-iron balconies that seemed to defy gravity itself. Built in the flamboyant style of a bygone era, it had been the home of Mrs. Elena Vargas for over a decade, ever since she arrived from Barcelona, with a trunk full of silks, a fortune in jewels, and a veil of mystery that the locals could never quite pierce. Elena was a woman who turned heads even in her 50s. Tall, with the lithe grace of a flamenco dancer, her dark hair streaked with silver and her eyes holding the fire of Catalan pride. Widowed young under circumstances whispered about in the village pub, she had inherited her husband's shipping empire, or so the story went. But money couldn't buy her peace. She was often seen pacing the infamous balcony, gazing out at the churning waves below, her silk scarves billowing like flags of surrender. "That woman's got ghosts chasing her," old Mr. Penworthy, the fisherman, would mutter over his pint. "Mark my words, one day she'll join 'em." It was on a particularly tempestuous autumn evening, with the sky bruised purple and the air thick with salt, that the tranquility shattered. A piercing scream rent the dusk, echoing from the cliffs like a siren's wail. It came from young Tommy Briggs, the errand boy who had been delivering groceries to the villa. He burst into the village square, his face ashen, gasping for breath. "She's down there! Mrs. Vargas! Fallen from the balcony! Oh God, it's awful!" Constable Hargreaves, a stout man, more accustomed to petty thefts than tragedies, pedalled his bicycle up the winding path to Villa Marisol with grim determination. By the time he arrived, a small crowd had gathered, neighbours drawn by the boy's cries, their lanterns flickering like fireflies in the gathering gloom. The body lay at the base of the cliff, a crumpled heap of elegance amid the jagged rocks, waves lapping hungrily at her feet. Elena's once vibrant scarf, embroidered with golden threads, fluttered weakly in the breeze, snagged on a protruding stone. "Back, all of you!" Hargreaves barked, his voice steadier than his hands. He knelt beside her, feeling for a pulse that wasn't there. The fall was sheer, a drop of at least 100 feet from the balcony's ornate railing. No one could survive that. Suicide, perhaps? The villagers crossed themselves, recalling her recent bouts of melancholy. But as Hargreaves scanned the scene, something nagged at him. The railing above looked intact, no signs of a struggle visible from below. He radioed for reinforcements, and word spread like wildfire. Murder in St. Agnes Bay. By morning, Inspector Derek Craddock of Scotland Yard had been summoned. His train from London arriving with the precision of a man who despised delays. Tall and lean, with a moustache that twitched like a divining rod for deceit, Craddock surveyed the villa with sharp eyes. No suicide note, he noted to Sergeant Lake, his unflappable aide. And that balcony, sturdy ironwork recently painted. A woman doesn't just topple over unless she's helped along. They climbed the path to the house, where the maid, a tearful Spanish woman named Maria, let them in. Senora was alone, she sobbed. I heard nothing until the scream. Inside, the villa was a treasure trove of opulence. Tapestries from Madrid, crystal from Venice, and a faint scent of jasmine that lingered like a memory. Craddock examined the balcony, noting the faint scuff marks on the tiles, and a single torn fibre from Elena's scarf caught on the railing's edge. Wind was strong last night, Lake offered. Could have blown her over if she was unsteady. Craddock snorted. Or someone gave her a shove. We'll need statements from everyone who knew her. Meanwhile, in a cosy cottage on the village outskirts, Miss Jane Marple stirred her morning tea, her keen blue eyes peering over half-moon spectacles at the newspaper headlines, already buzzing with the news. She was visiting her niece, Joan West, a spirited artist whose seascapes captured the bay's wild beauty. Joan burst into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from a hasty walk. Aunt Jane, have you heard? Poor Mrs. Vargas, plunged to her death. The whole village is in an uproar. They say it might be foul play. Miss Marple set down her cup with a gentle clink, her mind already weaving patterns from the threads of gossip Joan had gathered. How dreadful, my dear. Tell me, was she alone that evening? And that balcony? I've seen it from afar. It juts out so, boldly, like a challenge to fate. Joan nodded eagerly, recounting the details. Elena's reclusive habits, her sharp exchanges with visitors, and the rumours of financial woes back in Spain. Inspector Craddock's taken charge. He's questioning the nephew who just arrived from London. Carlos something. Handsome fellow, but shifty if you ask me. As Joan chattered on, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to similar tragedies she'd encountered in her quiet life at St. Mary Mead. A fall from a height. No witnesses. It reminded her of that unfortunate business with Colonel Prothero, where the simplest oversight revealed the truth. She rose, adjusting her woolen shawl. Perhaps we should take a walk, Joan. Fresh air clears the mind, and one never knows what one might observe. They strolled toward the cliffs, the wind tugging at their hats, and from a vantage point, Miss Marple gazed up at the fateful balcony. It cast a long shadow in the morning light, almost as if it were pointing accusingly at the sea below. Notice how the railing gleams, she murmured. Fresh paint, yet there's a spot near the edge where it's chipped. And that fibre, silk, I'd wager, matching her scarf. Joan stared, impressed. Aunt Jane, you're seeing clues everywhere. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Not everywhere, dear, just where people forget to look. Tragedies like this aren't born of shadows. They're crafted in the light of day, by hands all too human. Chapter 2. The Heirs Apparent. The coroner's court in St. Agnes Bay was a modest affair. Housed in the old town hall, with its creaking wooden benches and walls adorned with faded portraits of long-forgotten magistrates. On this crisp morning, however, The room hummed with an electric undercurrent of anticipation, as if the villagers sensed that the death of Elena Vargas was no mere accident, but the opening act in a drama of hidden motives and tangled alliances. The air was thick with the scent of polished oak and whispered conjectures, and every seat was filled with locals craning their necks for a glimpse of the key players. Coroner Wilkins, a portly man with a walrus moustache and a penchant for dramatic pauses, called the inquest to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "We are here to determine the circumstances surrounding the untimely demise of Mrs. Elena Vargas," he intoned, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Evidence suggests a fall from the balcony of Villa Marisol, but questions remain. Let us proceed with the witnesses." First to take the stand was Carlos Mendoza, Elena's nephew from London. He cut a striking figure in his tailored suit, his dark hair slicked back, and his olive complexion hinting at his Spanish heritage. At 32, Carlos possessed the easy charm of a man accustomed to turning heads in society drawing rooms, but there was a gambler's edge to his smile. Sharp, calculating, as if he were forever assessing the odds. He had arrived in the village only 3 days before the tragedy, ostensibly to check on his aunt's well-being. "Mr. Mendoza," the coroner began, peering over his spectacles, "you are the principal beneficiary of your aunt's estate, are you not? Villa Marisol, and a considerable sum passed to you." Carlos inclined his head, his expression a mask of solemn grief. "Indeed, sir. Aunt Elena was like a mother to me after my parents passed. She had no children of her own, and we shared a bond forged in our Barcelona days." His voice, smooth as aged brandy, carried a faint accent that lent an exotic flair to his words. "But her death, it's a blow I can scarcely comprehend." Inspector Craddock, seated in the front row with his notebook at the ready, leaned forward. "And her state of mind, Mr. Mendoza? Did she seem despondent?" Carlos hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the witness box. "She was troubled, spoke often of Uncle Ramon, how she longed to join him in the hereafter. The isolation here weighed on her, you see. Barcelona's vibrancy was her lifeblood, and this English coast felt like exile." He glanced around the room, his eyes meeting those of the villagers with a plea for understanding. "I urged her to sell the villa and return to Spain, but she resisted, stubborn to the end." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Old Mrs. Penworthy, knitting furiously in the back, whispered to her neighbour, "Exile! More like hiding from scandals. I heard tales of debts and lovers back in Catalonia." Next came Lydia Forbes, Elena's companion of 5 years. She was a contrast to Carlos, mousy and unassuming, her brown hair pulled into a severe bun, her dress a drab grey that seemed to drain the colour from her already pale face. In her 40s, Lydia moved with the hesitant gait of someone perpetually on the edge of apology, her hands twisting a handkerchief as if wringing out her anxieties. "Miss Forbes," the coroner said gently, sensing her fragility, "you were in the house that fateful evening. What can you tell us?" Lydia's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I was in the drawing room, sorting correspondence. Mrs. Vargas was on the balcony, as she often was at dusk. She loved watching the sea, said it reminded her of the Mediterranean. But that night she was agitated, pacing back and forth, muttering about old letters, something from her past, I think. She paused, dabbing at her eyes. I called out to her, begged her to come inside. The wind was fierce, and she seemed unsteady, but she waved me away, said she needed air to clear her thoughts. Craddock interjected sharply. Unsteady? Had she been drinking, or perhaps taken medication? Lydia flushed, No spirits, Inspector. She abhorred them after her husband's excesses, but she did complain of sleepless nights. Dr. Harlan had prescribed something mild for her insomnia. All eyes turned to Dr. Elias Harlan, the village physician, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a man in his late 50s, with a scholarly air, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a beak-like nose, and a neatly trimmed beard that failed to hide the nervous tick at the corner of his mouth. When called to the stand, he adjusted his tie with precise fingers, as if aligning his thoughts. "Doctor," the coroner prompted, "you treated Mrs. Vargas recently." "Indeed," Harlan replied, his tone measured and professional. "She consulted me 2 weeks prior for persistent insomnia. I prescribed a mild sedative, barbiturates in a low dosage, nothing potent enough to impair balance or judgment." His eyes darted sideways, avoiding Craddock's penetrating gaze, and he cleared his throat. "She mentioned stresses from her past, but nothing specific. I advised rest and perhaps a change of scenery." Craddock pressed on. "And were you at the villa that evening, Doctor?" Harlan stiffened. "No, Inspector. I was attending to patients in the village until late. My nurse can confirm." But there was a flicker in his expression, a momentary hesitation that did not escape the inspector's notice. The inquest adjourned for lunch amid a flurry of speculation. Was it suicide, driven by loneliness, or something more sinister, with inheritance as the glittering prize? Carlos stood to inherit a fortune estimated at over £50,000, enough to fuel envy in any heart. Meanwhile, in the sun-dappled garden of Joan West's cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat with her niece, sipping Earl Grey from delicate china cups. The cottage was a haven of tranquillity, with roses climbing the walls and the distant roar of the sea providing a soothing backdrop. Joan, her auburn hair tousled from the morning's excitement, recounted the inquest's details with animated gestures. "Aunt Jane, you should have seen Carlos Mendoza, charming as a fox in a henhouse, and that companion Lydia, wringing her hands like Lady Macbeth." Dr. Harlan looked positively shifty when asked about those sedatives. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. "People are much like knitting patterns, my dear Joan. One dropped stitch, and the entire design unravels. It's the small inconsistencies that reveal the flaws." She set aside her work, her sharp eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Tell me again about that torn fibre on the balcony rail. Silk, wasn't it? Matching her scarf." Joan leaned in, eager. "Yes, Inspector Craddock mentioned it briefly. Caught on a rough edge, as if she'd clutched at it during the fall. And there's talk of a missing jewel box. Elena was seen wearing her emeralds the day before, but they're nowhere to be found." Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together fragments like a mosaic. The fibre suggested resistance, not a willing leap. The jewels hinted at theft, perhaps a motive intertwined with murder. And the sedatives, mild, Harlan claimed, but doctors could be clever with dosages. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead involving a similar prescription. The culprit had tampered with the pills, turning remedy into ruin. "Human frailties, Joan," she murmured. "Greed, fear, resentment, they lurk beneath the politest surfaces. Carlos arrives just in time to inherit. Lydia, the loyal companion, might harbour grudges from years of servitude. And the doctor, why the evasion? Perhaps he knows more of Elena's Barcelona secrets than he lets on." Joan shivered despite the warmth. "Do you think it was murder, Aunt Jane?" Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. "I think, my dear, that we must watch and listen. Clues are like breadcrumbs. Follow them, and they lead to the gingerbread house, or the wolf. As the afternoon waned, Craddock paid a visit to the villa, his sergeant in tow. They combed Elena's study, finding ledgers that showed dwindling funds, shipments delayed, investments soured. A letter from a Barcelona solicitor lay open, warning of contested claims on the estate. "Motive aplenty," Craddock grunted. But as he examined the balcony once more, a glint caught his eye. A button, brass and engraved with a medical insignia, half buried in the soil below. Harlan's, or a red herring? Back at the cottage, Miss Marple pondered over tea. The heirs apparent were circling like vultures, but which one had struck the fatal blow? The wind picked up, rattling the windows, as if the cliffs themselves were whispering warnings. Chapter 3. Echoes from Barcelona. The salt-laden breeze swept through Villa Marisol like an uninvited guest, carrying with it the faint exotic aroma of paella spices from the kitchen, where Maria, the devoted maid, busied herself with unnecessary tasks. Inspector Craddock, his notebook flipped open and pencil poised, had descended upon the household staff with the persistence of a terrier on a scent. The villa's drawing-room, with its heavy velvet drapes and ornate Spanish fans mounted on the walls, felt oppressively warm despite the open French doors leading to the balcony. The very spot where Elena Vargas had met her end. Maria Gonzalez, a stout woman in her late 40s with calloused hands that spoke of years of loyal service, stood before the inspector, her black dress still creased from the previous day's mourning. She had crossed the sea with Elena from Barcelona over a decade ago, leaving behind the sun-baked streets of Catalonia for this misty English exile. Her English was halting, laced with the rolling rhythms of her native tongue, but her dark eyes burned with a fierce protectiveness. "Senora Vargas, she was afraid, see," Maria confessed, her voice cracking like dry earth underfoot. "Letters from España. Bad letters, threats maybe. She burned them in the fire, but I see the fear in her eyes." Craddock leaned forward, his moustache twitching. "Threats from whom, Maria? Old enemies, debts?" The maid's lips tightened into a thin line, her gaze dropping to the tiled floor. "No say more. Señora's secrets die with her. Loyalty, you understand?" She crossed herself hastily, as if warding off evil spirits, and retreated to the kitchen, leaving the inspector frustrated, and Sergeant Lake scribbling notes furiously. Craddock paced the room, his boots echoing on the polished wood. Stubborn as a mule, that one. But fear doesn't brew from nothing. Those letters, echoes from Barcelona, I'd wager. We need to dig deeper into her past. Lake nodded, flipping through his pad. The nephew mentioned scandals, sir. Perhaps a wire to the Spanish authorities. Meanwhile, across the village, Carlos Mendoza had orchestrated a gathering at the villa that afternoon, ostensibly a memorial tea to honor his aunt's memory. The invitation list was select: close associates, neighbors, and a few curious souls drawn by the whiff of intrigue. The drawing-room buzzed with subdued chatter, silver teapots clinking against saucers, and the occasional murmur of condolence masking sharper speculations. Carlos, ever the gracious host, moved among the guests with a glass of sherry in hand, his smile a veneer over calculating eyes. Among the attendees was Victor Hale, a suave art dealer from London with a reputation for unearthing rare treasures and burying inconvenient truths. Tall and impeccably dressed in a pinstriped suit, Victor possessed the polished manners of a man who navigated high society with the ease of a shark in calm waters. He cornered Carlos by the fireplace, his voice low and confidential. Poor Elena. She was in quite a bind, you know. That Catalan vase I procured for her, priceless, 15th century. But she insisted on selling it back to me at a loss. Financial troubles, old chap. Barcelona's ghosts catching up, perhaps? Carlos's grip tightened on his glass. Aunt Elena never discussed money with me. But yes, she mentioned old debts. You think someone from there? Victor shrugged elegantly. Who knows? The art world is full of shadows. Forgeries, rival collectors, nasty business. His eyes gleamed with unspoken knowledge, and he sipped his sherry, scanning the room as if appraising its contents for auction. Miss Marple, having been invited at Joan's insistence, her niece's artistic connections opening unexpected doors, sat unobtrusively in a high-backed armchair in the corner, her knitting bag at her feet and a cup of tea balanced on her knee. She appeared the picture of elderly harmlessness, her white hair neatly pinned and her spectacles perched on the end of her nose. But her keen eyes missed nothing. The way Lydia Forbes flinched at the mention of Barcelona, spilling a drop of tea on her saucer. How Dr. Harlan's hand trembled as he poured sherry for a guest, nearly missing the glass, and Victor's subtle glance toward the balcony doors, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Joan, seated beside her aunt, whispered excitedly, "Look at them all, Aunt Jane, like actors in a play, each hiding their lines." Miss Marple nodded subtly, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied her racing thoughts. "Precisely, my dear, and plays have plots, twists born of passion and deceit. This reminds me so much of that affair in St. Mary Mead with the poisoned chocolates. What seemed a simple gift was laced with venom from old rivalries. Hidden passions, Joan. They simmer until they boil over." As the afternoon wore on, conversations fragmented into clusters. Lydia, cornered by a nosy neighbour, stammered about Eleanor's habits. She received post from Spain regularly, envelopes with foreign stamps, thick ones, as if containing documents. She read them alone, then locked them away. Victor, overhearing, interjected smoothly. "Ah, the old country. Elena and I shared stories of Barcelona's galleries. She had exquisite taste, but tastes can lead to entanglements." His laugh was light, but Lydia's face paled, and she excused herself hastily. Dr. Harlan, nursing his drink by the window, caught Miss Marple's eye. He approached with forced geniality. "Miss Marple, isn't it? From St. Mary Mead. I've heard of your insights." His voice held a note of unease, like a man testing thin ice. "Dreadful business, this. Elena was a patient of mine, strong-willed, but fragile lately." Miss Marple smiled benignly. "Fragile? From what, doctor? The body or the spirit?" Harlan hesitated, his beard twitching. "Both, perhaps. Memories can be as debilitating as any ailment." He glanced toward Victor, who was now deep in conversation with Carlos about estate valuations. The gathering dispersed as twilight crept in, guests departing with hushed goodbyes. But the air lingered heavy with unspoken tensions. That night, under a moon veiled by clouds, a shadowy figure was spotted near the cliffs below the villa. Tommy Briggs, the errand boy, returning late from a delivery, swore he saw it, a cloaked silhouette moving stealthily along the path, pausing at the spot where Eleanor's body had lain. He called out, but the wind swallowed his voice, and the figure melted into the mist like a phantom. Word reached Inspector Craddock by dawn, rousing him from fitful sleep at the local inn. "A prowler, eh?" he muttered to Lake, pulling on his coat. "Could be our killer returning to the scene, or searching for something left behind." They hastened to the villa, where Maria greeted them with wide-eyed alarm. "Phantasma! A ghost!" she exclaimed, but Craddock dismissed it. Examining the cliff path, they found fresh footprints in the damp earth, men's boots, size 10, leading toward the garden gate. Back inside, Craddock confronted the household. Carlos denied any nocturnal wanderings, his alibi a late-night card game with Victor at the inn, confirmed by the barkeep. Lydia claimed insomnia but swore she hadn't left her room. Dr. Harlan, summoned for questioning, arrived flustered. I was home all night, tending to a patient via telephone. But his nurse, when queried later, revealed a gap in his schedule. Miss Marple, learning of the incident over breakfast with Joan, set down her toast thoughtfully. A shadowy figure, dear. Not a ghost, but perhaps someone haunted by guilt. Those footprints, deliberate I'd say, leading us astray or toward a buried clue. Joan leaned in. Like what, Aunt Jane? Miss Marple's eyes sparkled. Echoes, my child, from Barcelona, rippling across the sea. Letters burned, but ashes tell tales. And that vase Victor mentioned, priceless, or perhaps a forgery, hiding something more valuable. As the day unfolded, Craddock wired Barcelona for records on Elena's past. Her husband's suspicious death in a boating accident, rumoured insurance fraud, and whispers of a lover who vanished. Replies trickled in, painting a portrait of a woman fleeing not just grief, but pursuit. A name surfaced, Rafael Cortez, a former associate in the shipping business, recently released from prison for embezzlement. Victor Hale, when pressed, admitted knowing Cortez. A rogue, that one. Elena cut ties years ago, but grudges linger. Lydia, overhearing, dropped a vase, shattering it on the floor, a Catalan piece ironically. Clumsy, she muttered, but her hands shook. Miss Marple pondered in the cottage garden, the sea's roar a constant underscore. It's all connected, Joan. The letters, the figure, the flinching glances, like threads in a tapestry. Pull one, and the picture emerges. But who holds the needle? The echoes grew louder, promising revelations as the net tightened. Chapter 4. The Fractured Alibi. The sun hung low over St. Agnes Bay, casting long shadows across the cliffs that seemed to stretch toward Villa Marisol like accusing fingers. The village, usually drowsy by late afternoon, buzzed with fresh rumours as the investigation into Elena Vargas's death deepened. Inspector Craddock, his jaws set and his moustache bristling with determination, had taken over the village hall as a makeshift headquarters, its walls now plastered with notes and maps of the cliffside. The case was proving as slippery as the seaweed-slick rocks below the fatal balcony, and Craddock was not a man to tolerate loose ends. The morning brought a breakthrough. A local solicitor, Mr. Pym, had uncovered a codicil to Elena's will, drafted mere weeks before her death. The document, tucked away in a locked drawer, redirected a substantial bequest from a Barcelona orphanage to Carlos Mendoza, swelling his inheritance to include not only Villa Marisol, but also a collection of rare Spanish paintings. Motive, Craddock declared to Sergeant Lake, slamming the document onto the table. Enough to tempt any man with a taste for luxury. Lake nodded, scribbling furiously. But Carlos was at the inn, sir. Witnesses swear he was playing cards till midnight. The inspector's eyes narrowed. Alibis can be bought, Lake, or crafted. We'll test his story like a blacksmith tests steel. He dispatched constables to re-interview the inn's patrons, while he turned his attention to the villa's other occupants. Lydia Forbes, Elena's mousy companion, was summoned to the hall, her nervous demeanour more pronounced than ever. Her grey dress hung, loosely, as if she were shrinking within it, and her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief into knots. Miss Forbes, Craddock began, his tone deceptively mild. "You stated you were in the drawing room when Mrs. Vargas fell. Yet you mentioned hearing voices on the balcony. A man's voice, arguing. Care to elaborate?" Lydia's eyes darted to the window, where the sea churned restlessly. I'm not certain, Inspector. The wind was so loud, and I was sorting papers. But yes, I heard raised voices, hers, sharp and angry, and a man's, low and urgent. I thought it might be Carlos, but he was at the inn, wasn't he? Her voice wavered, and she bit her lip. I didn't go out to check. I should have, but Mrs. Vargas often had spirited discussions. Craddock leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And you didn't think to mention this sooner? A man's voice, arguing moments before a fatal fall. Lydia flushed, her hands trembling. I was frightened, sir. I thought perhaps it was nothing. Just her talking to herself as she sometimes did. She'd been so agitated about those letters from Spain. The inspector made a note, his pencil scratching like a warning. We'll revisit this, Miss Forbes. Omissions can be as telling as confessions. As she left, her footsteps echoed in the hall, hurried and uneven, like a bird fleeing a trap. Meanwhile, Miss Jane Marple and her niece Joan took a leisurely stroll along the cliff path, the wind tugging at their hats and carrying the tang of salt. Joan, her artist's eye drawn to the dramatic sweep of the landscape, gestured toward Villa Marisol's balcony, its ironwork glinting in the fading light. It's like a stage, Aunt Jane, poised for tragedy. Do you think Lydia's hiding something? She seemed awfully jumpy at the inquest. Miss Marple paused, her shawl flapping gently as she studied the villa from afar. People under strain, my dear, often betray themselves in small ways. Lydia's hands, always twisting, as if unravelling her own story. And those voices she heard. It reminds me of a case in St. Mary Mead, with that dreadful business of the stolen silver. The maid swore she heard nothing, but her fidgeting told another tale. She bent down, inspecting a patch of disturbed earth near the path. Look here, Joan. Mud, fresh from the villa's herb garden, not the cliff soil. Someone approached the house from the side, avoiding the main gate. Not a casual stroller, but someone with purpose. Joan's eyes widened. You mean the killer? But who? Miss Marple straightened, her expression serene yet sharp. That, my dear, depends on who had the most to lose or gain. A will changed, voices raised, a button found in the soil. All threads in a pattern. We must keep watching. Back at the villa, Craddock turned his attention to Victor Hale, the art dealer, whose polished exterior seemed to crack under scrutiny. Summoned to the hall, Victor lounged in the chair with affected ease, his cufflinks glinting as he adjusted his tie. Inspector, surely you don't suspect me. I was merely a business acquaintance. Elena owed me for that Catalan vase. £1,500, mind you. We had a heated discussion that afternoon, but I left by 6. Ask the station master. I caught the evening train to London. Craddock's moustache twitched sceptically. A heated discussion about money, Mr. Hale. Enough to push a woman to her death. Victor's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Nonsense. Elena was distraught, yes, but I'm no murderer. Besides, I'd hardly risk my reputation over a debt. Yet his fingers drummed on the armrest, a rhythm of unease that Craddock noted. The investigation took a darker turn that evening when Maria the maid vanished. A search of her quarters revealed a hastily scrawled note. I must return to Barcelona. Forgive me. Her few belongings were gone, and the village buzzed with speculation. Had she fled from guilt or fear? Craddock, furious at the lapse, dispatched telegrams to ports and stations, but Maria's trail was as elusive as sea mist. "She knows something," he growled to Lake. "Those letters she mentioned, threats from Spain, we need her back." At Joan's cottage, Miss Marple sipped tea by the fire, her knitting needles a steady counterpoint to the storm brewing outside. Joan recounted the day's developments, her voice tinged with excitement. "Maria's gone, Aunt Jane. Do you think she pushed Mrs. Vargas? Or maybe she saw something and ran to save herself?" Miss Marple set down her needles, her eyes distant yet piercing. "Maria's loyalty was fierce, Joan, but even loyalty can crack under pressure. Her flight suggests fear, not guilt. Those letters she spoke of, burned, she said, but ashes can be sifted. And Victor's alibi, so neatly tied to a train schedule. It reminds me of young Tommy Granger in St. Mary Mead, who swore he was at the cinema when his uncle's safe was robbed. The ticket stub was genuine, but the timing was off." Joan leaned forward, enthralled. "You think Victor lied?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I think, my dear, that alibis are like eggs, smooth on the outside, but crack them, and you find the truth. Victor's debt, Carlos's windfall, Lydia's nerves, they're all pieces of a puzzle. And that button Craddock found, with its medical insignia, curious, don't you think?" As night fell, the village settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Craddock, burning the midnight oil, pored over witness statements, his mind circling the fractured alibis. Lydia's vague account of voices, Victor's too convenient train ride, Carlos's card game, each held a flaw, a chink in the armor of innocence. He dispatched Lake to the inn, where a bleary-eyed barmaid recalled Victor leaving early, not late, contradicting his timeline. Miss Marple, meanwhile, sat by her window, watching the moon cast silver threads across the sea. The case was like her knitting, a tangle of threads that with patience would form a pattern. The changed will pointed to greed, the voices to confrontation, the missing maid to secrets buried in Barcelona's past. And that button, Dr. Harlan's perhaps, or a clever misdirection? She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who staged her own robbery to test her heirs, only to uncover betrayal. "People don't change, Joan," she murmured, though her niece had retired for the night. "They wear masks, but the heart betrays them." The wind howled, carrying echoes of a truth yet to be unveiled, as the cliffs stood sentinel over a village rife with suspicion. Chapter 5. The Hidden Correspondence. The dawn broke over St. Agnes Bay with a deceptive calm, the sea glinting like polished silver under a sky streaked with rose and amber. Yet beneath this serene facade, the village simmered with unease, as if the cliffs themselves held their breath, awaiting the next revelation in the mystery of Elena Vargas's death. Inspector Craddock, fortified by strong coffee and a dogged resolve, stood in the study of Villa Marisol, his eyes scanning the room for clues that might unravel the tangled web of motives and alibis. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather, and the faint lingering trace of jasmine, a perfume Eleanor had favoured. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as breakthroughs often do. Sergeant Lake, rummaging through a mahogany desk inlaid with mother-of-pearl, discovered a hidden compartment behind a false panel. Inside lay a bundle of letters, their edges yellowed with age, tied with a faded ribbon and scented faintly with lavender. Craddock's pulse quickened as he untied the knot, revealing a series of missives penned in an elegant looping script. The postmarks were Spanish, dated over a decade ago, but some bore more recent dates, incongruous with their weathered appearance. The contents were explosive. references to a scandalous affair in Barcelona, a child given up in secrecy, and veiled threats demanding payment to keep the past buried. "This changes everything," Craddock declared, his voice taut with excitement. "Blackmail Lake. Someone was squeezing Mrs. Vargas, and she paid to keep her secrets locked away." He read aloud a particularly chilling line. "The truth about the child will ruin you, Elena. Send the money, or Barcelona will come calling." The signature was a single initial, R. Could it be Rafael Cortez, the former associate mentioned in the solicitor's wire? Craddock dispatched a telegram to Barcelona, demanding details on Cortez's whereabouts. The letters pointed a finger at Dr. Elias Harlan, who had treated Elena during her years in Spain. Craddock summoned him to the villa, his tone clipped. Harlan arrived, his scholarly demeanour fraying at the edges, his glasses slipping down his nose as he faced the inspector's scrutiny. "Doctor, you knew Mrs. Vargas in Barcelona," Craddock said, holding up a letter. "These suggest you were privy to her secrets. Care to explain?" Harlan's face drained of colour, his beard quivering. "It was innocent, I assure you. She confided in me about her troubles, a youthful indiscretion, nothing more. I was her physician, not her confessor. I urged her to seek peace, not to dwell on the past." His alibi for the night of the murder wavered further when a patient, Mrs. Tuttle, reported he'd cancelled a late appointment, claiming illness. "I was unwell," Harlan insisted, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Across the village, at Joan West's cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the hearth, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome as she listened to Joan's breathless recounting of the day's discoveries. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the shifting suspicions in the case. "Letters, Aunt Jane, hidden in the desk full of secrets about a child and blackmail. Do you think Dr. Harlan was involved?" He looked positively ghastly at the memorial tea. Miss Marple set down her knitting, her blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Letters, my dear, are like mirrors. They reflect what someone wishes you to see. These sound too convenient, too perfectly damning. Notice the lavender scent, Joan. An old trick to make new paper seem aged. It reminds me of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a forged diary nearly sent an innocent man to the gallows. Someone crafted these letters to point fingers, but at whom? She paused, her mind weaving threads. And Dr. Harlan's nerves? Guilt or fear of being ensnared? Joan leaned forward, her auburn curls catching the firelight. But who would forge them? Carlos to secure his inheritance, or Victor to cover his debts? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Or someone less obvious, Joan. Someone who moves quietly, like a shadow in a storm. The storm in question was brewing both literally and figuratively. Dark clouds rolled in from the sea, and by evening a tempest lashed the cliffs, rattling windows and sending villagers scurrying indoors. It was under this cover that Lydia Forbes made her move. A porter at the railway station, braving the rain to lock up, spotted her boarding the late train to London, a small valise clutched tightly. Suspicious, he alerted Constable Hargreaves, who intercepted her at the platform. Inside the valise, wrapped in a scarf, was Elena's missing jewel box, emeralds, sapphires, and a diamond brooch that gleamed with cold fire. Craddock confronted Lydia at the station, his voice cutting through the howling wind. "Going somewhere, Miss Forbes? With stolen jewels, no less?" Lydia's face crumpled, her hands wringing the sodden handkerchief. "I wasn't stealing. I was protecting them. Mrs. Vargas asked me to keep them safe. She feared someone in the house." Her story rang hollow, and Craddock escorted her back to the village hall, the jewels locked in his briefcase. The news reached Miss Marple over breakfast, Joan bursting in with the tale. Lydia tried to flee Aunt Jane, caught with the jewels. She claims she was safeguarding them, but it's nonsense, isn't it? Miss Marple buttered her toast thoughtfully, her mind turning over the puzzle. Nonsense, perhaps, but revealing. Lydia's flight suggests desperation, not necessarily guilt. The jewels were a lure, Joan, bait to distract or to accuse. And those letters, their scent matches the lavender in the villa's garden, where Lydia tends her herbs. A coincidence? I think not. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident involving a stolen necklace, where the thief planted it in another's room to shift blame. People act out of character when cornered, she mused. Lydia's timidity hides something. Fear, greed, or perhaps loyalty, twisted into betrayal. Craddock, meanwhile, delved deeper into Victor Hale's affairs. A discreet inquiry to London revealed the Catalan vase was a fake, its provenance fabricated to inflate its value. Elena had discovered the fraud and threatened to expose Victor, whose reputation hung by a thread. Confronted, Victor's suave facade cracked. "She was going to ruin me," he snapped, his cufflinks flashing as he gestured. "I argued with her, yes, but I left her alive. Check the train records." Yet the barmaid's testimony, Victor leaving the inn early, gnawed at his alibi. The inspector's net widened, ensnaring Carlos, whose card game was corroborated, but whose sudden wealth raised eyebrows. A wire from Barcelona confirmed Rafael Cortez's release from prison, but his current whereabouts were unknown. Had he sent the letters, or were they a local fabrication? Craddock's frustration mounted. The case a labyrinth of half-truths. Miss Marple, strolling with Joan through the village, paused by the churchyard, where the wind carried the toll of a bell. "The truth is like that bell, Joan. Clear when you hear it, but muffled by distance. The letters, the jewels, the alibis, they're all distractions. We must look closer, at the small things. The mud on the path, the chipped paint on the rail, the button in the soil. They tell a story if we listen." As night fell, the storm raged on, lightning illuminating the cliffs like a spotlight on a stage. In the village hall, Craddock pored over the letters, their lavender scent a taunting clue. Maria's absence loomed large. Had she fled to protect Elena's secrets, or her own? And Lydia's jewel box, stolen or planted? The echoes from Barcelona grew louder, but the truth remained just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of human frailty. Chapter 6. The Balcony's Whisper. The storm that had battered St. Agnes Bay subsided by morning, leaving a village washed clean but restless, as if the sea had churned up secrets along with its debris. Villa Marisol stood sentinel on the cliff, its balcony casting a stark silhouette against the pale dawn sky, whispering of the tragedy it had witnessed. Inspector Craddock, his eyes ringed with fatigue from sleepless nights, convened a final gathering in the villa's drawing room, determined to unmask Elena Vargas's killer. The air was thick with tension, the scent of jasmine now mingled with the acrid tang of suspicion. The suspects were assembled like chess pieces on a board. Carlos Mendoza, his charm tempered by a wary edge. Lydia Forbes, her mousy demeanor fraying under the weight of her failed flight. Victor Hale, his polished exterior tarnished by accusations. Dr. Elias Harlan, his scholarly air strained by evasive glances. And Maria Gonzalez, the maid, tracked down by constables at a Plymouth dock, her face a mask of defiance and fear. The room's heavy drapes were drawn back, letting the morning light expose every nervous tick and sidelong glance. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his moustache bristling with authority. "One of you pushed Mrs. Vargas to her death," he declared, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The evidence is clear. A tampered railing, a torn scarf, and motives as plentiful as the rocks below. No more half-truths. Speak, or I'll haul you all to London for further questioning." The threat hung heavy, but the suspects remained silent, their eyes darting like trapped animals. Miss Jane Marple, invited at Joan's insistence, sat quietly in a corner, her knitting bag at her feet and her spectacles perched low. To the untrained eye, she was a frail spinster, her white hair and gentle demeanour blending into the background. But her mind was a steel trap, sifting through the case's threads. The forged letters, the stolen jewels, the muddy footprints, and the medical button found near the cliff. She cleared her throat softly, a sound that drew every gaze. "If I may, Inspector?" she asked, her voice mild but commanding. Craddock, though sceptical of amateur sleuths, nodded. "Go ahead, Miss Marple. You've a knack for seeing what others miss." The room tensed, as if sensing the unravelling of their carefully woven facades. Miss Marple folded her hands, her eyes sweeping the group. "This tragedy is not about grand gestures, but small betrayals. The balcony's whisper tells us so. The railing, sturdy iron, yet weakened by saw marks, cleverly hidden under fresh paint. An accident? No. The wind blew Mrs. Vargas's scarf back, snagging a fibre on the rail, proof she struggled, not leapt. Someone planned this, someone who knew her habits, her vulnerabilities." She turned to Lydia, whose hands clutched her handkerchief like a lifeline. "Miss Forbes, you heard voices that night. An argument, you said. But you also tended the villa's herb garden, where lavender grows, its scent matching the forged letters found in the desk. Those letters, so conveniently damning, pointed to Dr. Harlan and a Barcelona scandal. Yet their paper was new, aged artificially. You forged them, didn't you? To shift suspicion, to muddy the waters." Lydia gasped, her face paling. "Lies! I'd never—" Her voice broke, and she sank into her chair, trembling. Miss Marple continued, undeterred. "Maria, your loyalty to Mrs. Vargas was fierce, but you saw more than you admitted. You fled to Plymouth, fearing for your life, but not before witnessing something damning. You saw Lydia slip something into Mrs. Vargas's tea that evening, a sedative, stronger than Dr. Harlan's prescription, enough to make her drowsy, unsteady." Maria's eyes widened, her hands twisting her apron. "See, I saw the powder in the cup. I thought it was medicine, but Signora was so sleepy after. I say nothing, for fear they blame me." Her accent thickened with emotion, and she crossed herself, tears streaming. Craddock's eyes narrowed, locking onto Lydia. "Is this true, Miss Forbes? Did you drug her?" Lydia shook her head frantically, but Miss Marple pressed on, her voice gentle yet relentless. "The jewels, Lydia, were your undoing. You claimed to protect them, but you took them to flee, to start anew. Mrs. Vargas discovered your theft, not just of jewels, but small sums from her accounts over years. Embezzlement, hidden in your timid facade. That night, she confronted you on the balcony, didn't she? About the money, the will you urged her to change in Carlos's favour, hoping for a share. In a moment of panic you pushed her, knowing the railing would give. No, Lydia cried, leaping to her feet. She was cruel, always belittling me. I only wanted what I deserved. Her voice cracked, and she collapsed, sobbing. Yes, I put laudanum in her tea, to calm her, not to kill. But she accused me, threatened to expose me. I pushed her, but I didn't mean for her to fall. The room erupted in gasps. Carlos's face drained of colour, Victor's jaw tightened, and Harlan exhaled, as if a weight had lifted. Maria wept silently, her loyalty vindicated. Craddock signalled to Lake, who moved to restrain Lydia, her confession sealing her fate. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her expression serene. "It's always the quiet ones, Inspector, like a housemaid in St. Mary Mead who poisoned her mistress's tea over a petty slight. Timidity masks venom, given the right provocation." Dr. Harlan spoke up, his voice shaky but clear. "She tried to blackmail me, too, about my time in Barcelona. Claimed I knew of Elena's supposed child, but there was no child. Elena told me it was a rumor she spread to test loyalties." Victor nodded, his composure returning. "And me about the vase. It was a fake, yes, but Elena's threats were leverage, not murder. I argued with her, but I left her alive." Carlos, visibly relieved, added, "I suspected Lydia was skimming funds, but Aunt Elena refused to believe it until the end. I had no part in this." Craddock, though impressed, turned to Miss Marple. "How did you piece it together, ma'am? The letters, the laudanum, the rail?" She smiled faintly. "Observation, Inspector. The lavender in the garden, the chipped paint, the fibres. Snag. They told a story of calculation, not chance. Lydia's nerves betrayed her, as they did in a St. Mary Mead case with a stolen brooch. Small things like dropped stitches unravel the grandest schemes." As Lydia was led away, her sobs echoing down the hall, the villa seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare. Craddock shook his head, marvelling. "You've a mind like a razor, Miss Marple. Scotland Yard could use you." She chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm just an old woman who notices things, Inspector. People are predictable if you know where to look." Outside, the sea whispered against the cliffs, its rhythm unbroken, as if approving the truth's emergence. The balcony stood silent, its role as a stage for betrayal complete. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the human heart, its desires, its fears, its capacity for darkness. The case was closed, but the echoes of Barcelona would linger, a reminder that no secret stays buried forever. Chapter 7. Threads Tied. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Joan West's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the floor like a tapestry of secrets unravelled. St. Agnes Bay had settled into a fragile calm, the storm's fury a memory. But the village still buzzed with the aftershocks of Lydia Forbes's confession. The cliffs, steadfast and silent, bore witness to the resolution of Elena Vargas's murder, yet their shadows seemed to linger, as if reluctant to release the tale's final threads. Miss Jane Marple sat at the breakfast table, her knitting needles idle for once, as she sipped tea and reflected on the case's denouement. Joan, her eyes bright with curiosity, leaned forward, eager for her aunt's insights. "Aunt Jane, it's extraordinary!" Joan exclaimed, spreading marmalade on her toast. "Lydia, of all people, so meek, yet so vicious. How did you know it was her, when even Inspector Craddock was chasing shadows?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her blue eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "People, my dear, are like my knitting. The pattern seems complex, but tug at the right thread, and it all comes clear. Lydia's timidity was her mask, just as it was with that housemaid in St. Mary Mead who tampered with the vicar's wine. The quiet ones, Joan, they simmer with resentments, and when they boil over, the results are deadly." Back at Villa Marisol, Inspector Craddock was tying up loose ends with the efficiency of a man who loathed an untidy case. Lydia Forbes, now in custody, had been escorted to the county jail, her sobs fading into the distance as the police van rumbled away. The evidence was ironclad, her confession corroborated by Maria's testimony about the laudanum, the forged letters scented with lavender from the villa's garden, and the tampered balcony railing, its saw marks revealed under close inspection. The jewel box recovered from Lydia's valise had been returned to the estate, its glittering contents catalogued for Carlos Mendoza's inheritance. Craddock convened a final meeting with the remaining players. Carlos, Victor Hale, Dr. Harlan, and Maria in the villa's study, where the air still held a faint trace of jasmine and the weight of recent revelations. The inspector stood by the desk, his notebook closed, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "The case is closed," he announced. "Miss Forbes acted alone, driven by greed and fear of exposure. But I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Miss Marple's unconventional assistance." His tone held a grudging respect, and he inclined his head toward the absent spinster. Carlos, his charm restored now that suspicion had lifted, spoke up. "I owe her a debt, Inspector. Aunt Elena trusted Lydia, and I did too, until those final days when she grew secretive. I should have acted sooner." His voice carried a note of genuine regret, though his eyes gleamed with the prospect of his newfound wealth. Victor Hale, leaning against the mantelpiece, adjusted his cufflinks with a practised air. "Elena's threats about the vase nearly ruined me, but I swear I never touched her. Lydia's scheming was clever, planting those letters to frame Harlan, stealing the jewels to fund her escape. She played us all." His smile was wry, acknowledging the narrow escape from suspicion. Dr. Harlan, his scholarly composure returning, cleared his throat. "Lydia tried to drag me into her web, claiming I knew of a non-existent child from Elena's past. But Elena herself told me it was a fabrication, a test to gauge her circle's loyalty. I should have been more forthcoming, Inspector, but fear of scandal silenced me." His glasses glinted as he met Craddock's gaze, a rare moment of candour. Maria, standing quietly by the door, spoke softly, her accent thick with emotion. "Signora Elena was kind to me, but fierce. She knew someone betrayed her, but not who. I ran to protect her honour, not to hide guilt. Gracias, Miss Marple, for seeing the truth." She clutched a rosary, her eyes glistening with relief. Craddock nodded, satisfied. "The will stands as amended, Mr. Mendoza. The paintings and villa are yours, minus the charity bequest Lydia manipulated. As for the letters, they're evidence now, but they confirm no child existed. Just a cruel rumour Elena used to flush out disloyalty." He paused, his thoughts drifting to the elderly woman who had outwitted him. Miss Marple saw what we missed, the human heart's capacity for deception. In the cottage, Miss Marple shared her final reflections with Joan, who hung on every word. "The balcony was merely the stage, dear, not the story." Lydia's resentment festered over years. Small slights, unpaid gratitude, the weight of serving a woman as vibrant as Elena. The changed will was her gambit, hoping Carlos would reward her loyalty. When Elena uncovered the embezzlement, confrontation was inevitable. The laudanum, the weakened, rail, it was desperation, not premeditation, that tipped her hand. Joan shivered, despite the cosy fire. "But the letters, Aunt Jane, why forge them?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the tale's darkness. "To deflect blame, dear. Lydia knew of Elena's Barcelona past and crafted a narrative to implicate Harlan, perhaps even Victor. The lavender was her mistake, too specific, too traceable to her garden. It's like that case with the stolen silver in St. Mary Mead, where the thief used rose water to mask her scent, but the flowers in her yard betrayed her." She paused, gazing out at the sea, its waves now gentle against the cliffs. "The button by the cliff puzzled me at first. a medical insignia suggesting Harlan. But it was too obvious, likely planted by Lydia to further her misdirection. Human nature, Joan, is predictable. Greed, fear, wounded pride, they drive even the meek to desperate acts. Joan leaned back, awestruck. You make it sound so simple, Aunt Jane. Inspector Craddock was ready to arrest half the village. Miss Marple chuckled softly. He's a good man, but men like him look for evidence first, motive second. I start with the people, their glances, their hesitations. Like my old friend Mrs. Bantry, who noticed her maid's blush when the silver went missing. The heart speaks louder than fingerprints. As the day waned, Craddock visited the cottage, hat in hand, to offer his thanks. Miss Marple, you've a gift for seeing through the fog. That lavender, the rails paint, I'd have missed them without you. She waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense, Inspector. I merely noticed what's there. You'd have found the truth in time. He shook his head, marvelling. Scotland Yard could use a dozen of you. Will you stay in St. Agnes Bay? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes drifting to the sea. Oh, I think St. Mary Mead calls me home, Inspector, but I'll carry this tale with me, a reminder that secrets, like waves, always reach the shore. That evening, as Joan sketched the cliffs, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the blue shawl taking shape under her deft fingers. The case was closed, the jewels restored, the will honoured. Yet the balcony's whisper lingered in her mind, a testament to the frailties that bind humanity. Greed, betrayal, and the quiet rage of the overlooked. The sea murmured below, its secrets safe in its depths, while above, the cliffs stood watch, eternal and unyielding.